At my niece's birthday party, I said. Can't wait for the big family dinner tomorrow. My uncle laughed. Wait, you don't know? That was yesterday. My grandmother pulled out her phone. Photos, toasts, everyone smiling. My cousin snapped. Maybe take the hint next time. I didn't respond, but what I did next wiped the smiles off every one of their faces. I, 32M, stood there holding a wrapped present for my 6-year-old niece, watching my uncle's face twist into something between amusement and cruelty. The birthday party was winding down, kids running around the backyard while adults nursed their second beers, and I had just made what I thought was innocent small talk about tomorrow's family dinner. My uncle's laugh cut through the evening air like a blade. He told me to wait, asking if I really didn't know, his voice dripping with mock surprise. The dinner had been yesterday, he said, and suddenly the conversations around me seemed to quiet down, as if everyone was tuning in to watch my humiliation unfold. My grandmother, sitting in her lawn chair with her phone already in hand, didn't even look up as she started swiping through photos. She held the screen toward me with deliberate slowness, showing me image after image of the family gathered around her dining room table. There was my father raising a toast, my siblings laughing at something someone had said, my cousins passing dishes around the table. Everyone was there, smiling and celebrating, and I wasn't in a single frame. My cousin, the birthday girl's mother, couldn't resist twisting the knife deeper. She suggested maybe I should take the hint next time, her words sharp enough to draw blood. The other family members shifted uncomfortably, some looking away while others watched with barely concealed satisfaction. I had always been the family outsider, the one who asked too many questions about our grandfather's business dealings, the one who refused to laugh at their casual racism, the one who called them out when they treated service workers poorly. I didn't respond to my cousin's barb. Instead, I smiled, kissed my niece goodbye, and told everyone I had to leave early for work the next morning. As I walked to my car, I could hear them already moving on to other topics, dismissing me as easily as they had excluded me from their dinner. But they had made a critical error in their little power play. They had forgotten what I did for a living. I worked in digital forensics for a mid-sized accounting firm, specializing in uncovering financial irregularities and fraud. Over the past few years, I had been quietly documenting my family's questionable business practices, not out of malice, but because their brazen disregard for ethics had always bothered me. My uncle ran a construction company that consistently underbid municipal contracts. My father had a landscaping business that employed workers under suspicious circumstances, and my grandfather's estate had some interesting tax implications that never quite added up. That night, I sat in my home office and opened the files I had been building for months. Bank records, tax documents, employment records, permit applications, inspection reports. Everything was there, meticulously organized and cross-referenced. What had started as idle curiosity during family gatherings had evolved into a comprehensive picture of systematic fraud, tax evasion, and labor violations spanning 3 generations. The next morning, I made several phone calls. The IRS fraud hotline was surprisingly easy to navigate, and the agent I spoke with seemed very interested in the documentation I could provide. The Department of Labor took detailed notes about the employment practices I described. The city's contract compliance office scheduled a meeting for later that week. I spent the following days making copies of everything, organizing evidence packets, and preparing detailed timelines. Each agency wanted slightly different information, but the core evidence remained the same. Years of cutting corners, exploiting workers, and gaming the system had left a paper trail that even a moderately competent investigator could follow. The first shoe dropped 2 weeks later. My uncle called me, his voice tight with panic, asking if I knew anything about IRS agents showing up at his office with a warrant. I told him I had no idea what he was talking about, which was technically true. I hadn't known they would move that quickly. My father called the next day with similar news. Labor investigators had interviewed several of his workers and were asking pointed questions about wage theft and employment classification. He wanted to know if I had heard anything through my work connections about increased enforcement in our area. I played dumb, expressing appropriate concern and offering to help however I could. The irony wasn't lost on me that they were now reaching out to the family member they had deliberately excluded from their dinner just weeks earlier. The investigations moved faster than I had anticipated. Within a month, my uncle's company lost 2 major municipal contracts pending the outcome of the compliance review. My father received a formal notice of violation from the Department of Labor, along with a demand for back wages and penalties that would effectively bankrupt his operation. But the real masterpiece was my grandfather's estate. The tax implications I had uncovered led to a full audit that revealed decades of unreported income and fraudulent deductions. The penalties and interest alone would consume most of the inheritance my cousins had been counting on to fund their children's college educations. The family started to fracture under the pressure. My uncle accused my father of keeping sloppy records that had attracted attention. My father blamed my grandfather for setting up the business structures that were now under scrutiny. My cousins turned on each other, each claiming they had no knowledge of the questionable practices while simultaneously trying to distance themselves from the legal consequences. I watched it all unfold from a comfortable distance, offering sympathy and support whenever anyone called to vent their frustrations. I had become the family's confidant, the neutral party they could trust with their fears and anxieties about the investigations. The second wave of consequences hit during the holidays. My uncle's construction company filed for bankruptcy, unable to operate without the municipal contracts that had been its primary revenue source. My father sold his landscaping business to pay the Department of Labor settlement, taking a job with his former competitor at a fraction of his previous income. The family Christmas gathering was a subdued affair. Gone were the boastful stories about business success and the casual displays of wealth that had characterized previous years. Instead, there was quiet desperation and barely concealed resentment as everyone tried to figure out how their comfortable lives had unraveled so quickly. I brought expensive wine and thoughtful gifts, playing the role of the successful family member who had somehow escaped the misfortune that had befallen everyone else. When my grandmother mentioned how strange it was that all these investigations had started around the same time, I nodded sympathetically and suggested it might be part of a broader crackdown on small businesses in our area. My cousin, the same one who had told me to take the hint, pulled me aside during dessert. She asked if my company might be hiring, explaining that her husband's legal troubles had put them in a difficult financial position. I told her I would keep an ear out for opportunities, knowing full well that her husband's fraud conviction would make him unemployable in any legitimate business. The final piece of my revenge came 6 months later at my niece's 7th birthday party. The gathering was much smaller this time, held at a community center rather than my cousin's backyard because they had lost their house in the bankruptcy proceedings. The adults looked tired and defeated, their conversations focused on legal bills and job searches rather than vacation plans and business deals. As I was leaving, my uncle approached me with an envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter apologizing for the family's treatment of me over the years. He acknowledged that they had often excluded me from gatherings and dismissed my concerns about their business practices. The letter went on to ask for my help in finding work, explaining that his reputation in the construction industry was ruined and he needed a fresh start. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. I told my uncle I appreciated his honesty and would think about how I might be able to help. As I walked to my car, I reflected on how completely the power dynamic had shifted. The family members who had once looked down on me as the unsuccessful outsider were now begging for my assistance. But the most satisfying moment came when my grandmother approached me at the car. She mentioned that she had been thinking about that family dinner I had asked about at the previous birthday party, the one where everyone had laughed at my exclusion. She said she realized now that the family had made a mistake in not including me, and she hoped I could forgive them for their oversight. I smiled and told her there was nothing to forgive, that I understood families sometimes had complicated dynamics. As I drove away, I thought about how my systematic documentation of their crimes had accomplished something their deliberate cruelty never could have. They had tried to exclude me from their family, but I had succeeded in excluding them from their comfortable lives. The investigations continued for another year, with various family members pleading guilty to reduced charges and paying substantial fines. My uncle served 6 months in minimum security prison for tax evasion. My father's business never recovered, and he eventually moved to another state to escape the local reputation he had earned. I maintained my role as the sympathetic family member throughout it all, offering emotional support and practical advice, while carefully avoiding any appearance of involvement in their legal troubles. When anyone asked how I had managed to avoid the scrutiny that had destroyed the rest of the family's businesses, I simply explained that working in compliance had taught me the importance of following regulations carefully. The truth was that I had learned something valuable from their exclusion tactics. Sometimes the most effective revenge isn't dramatic confrontation or public humiliation. Sometimes it's the patient, methodical dismantling of everything someone has built, done so carefully that they never see it coming until it's too late to stop it. My family had taught me that actions have consequences, just not the lesson they intended. They had shown me that excluding someone from your inner circle doesn't make them go away. It just gives them the distance they need to see your vulnerabilities clearly. And in their case, those vulnerabilities were extensive enough to bring down everything they had spent decades building. As I write this, 2 years after that birthday party confrontation, most of my extended family has scattered to different cities, their local reputation and business connections destroyed beyond repair. I still send birthday cards to my niece and maintain cordial relationships with everyone. But the family gatherings are smaller now, quieter, and notably more respectful. They learned to take the hint, just not the one they thought they were sending.